Why can't I unmute? So it's only fitting that I couldn't unmute my own button. So I was thanking the Connor, Stong, and Buckaloo band for that great intro music. So welcome to the Federal Government Affairs Update. I'm Heather Steimler. I'm the Managing Director of the Claims Department and also the General Counsel here at Connor, Stong, and Buckaloo. Today, we're happy to be joined by clients from all walks of life: construction, hospitality, education, government. So we're trying to tailor our presentation to what matters to you. We are not going to be discussing healthcare unless you ask a question around healthcare. What we are going to discuss is the additional COVID relief, if any, the prospect of passing an infrastructure bill, and then also the likelihood of passing a pandemic risk insurance program. And for those of you who don't know, that's the relief package that would be for any pandemic in the future, and we'll talk more about that later. If at any time during the presentation you want to ask a question, there's a Q&A box. If you type it, we'll try to answer it throughout the presentation. You do not have to wait till the end. Today, I'm joined by two of my colleagues and friends from Washington, D.C., both veteran lobbyists and who partner with us every day on various issues that impact both the insurance industry, but also our customers. The first is Joel Wood, who's Senior Vice President of Government Affairs at the Council of Insurance Agents and Brokers. Joel is a veteran lobbyist, has been with the council since 1993, and prior to that, he worked with a congressman on the Hill in the press and he was the press and legislative director. The one fun fact about Joel Wood I will give: if you're ever going to DC, Joel is the person you want to ask where to eat. Joel is a huge foodie, and so he's always my recommendation for good dining in DC. Joel Copperrood is Joel's colleague at the Council of Insurance Agents and Brokers. He's a vice president. He also works with us on various issues that impact our customers and the industry, and has worked for the council. I think, Joel, you've been there since as long as I've worked with you guys, which has been over 13, 14 years. Yep. And Joel, what I will say about Joel Copperrood, if you're looking for the best drink in Mykonos, he's your guy. So now, as I was growing up, my mom always said two things to me: never talk politics or religion because you're sure to offend somebody. Well, today we're going to break that rule because we have to talk a little politics. You can't talk and give a legislative update without giving a little political spin or the dynamics, because that's what makes it interesting, but also gives you the chances of success of something going through. But we have made it a balanced approach. We have one D and one R. I will not tell you who is which. You'll have to figure that out on your own, and I think you'll be able to do so. If not, the accent will probably give it away. The other thing I will say is, throughout the presentation, there may be snide remarks or things said in jest. We are all really good friends, and we have fun giving those jabs across the aisle. But at the end of the day, unlike what you see in reality, we're all friends, and we hope you do not take offense to anything that is said today. But as any good politician would say, if you're asking me what we're for whatever you want. Whatever our customers want, that's what we stand for as well, just like any politician. So with that, I think it's important, before we get into the issue, to sort of set the table. And I'm going to start with you, Joel K. We heard that we know the Democrats control the House and the Senate and the White House. So that means, I think there's an expectation that President Biden can get any agenda through. Is that reality?
Definitely not. First of all, thanks, Heather. Thanks for having us. We love working with your team there at the council. You're one of our favorite members. And of course, hello to all of your clients across sectors. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for your time. The answer is definitely not. After the election in November, it was a split Congress, right? The Democrats held the House barely by a 5 to 6 seat majority, and they did not have the Senate. We were waiting to hear the final results of the runoffs in Georgia. And nobody in Washington, myself included, thought that Democrats would be able to pull this off, especially in a special election in Georgia. But they shocked everybody when Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff actually became the next senators. And there's a funny tweet that I read afterwards that said, the day after November, the United States of America elected Joe Biden president of the United States. And last week, Georgia elected Joe Manchin president of the United States. That's exactly where we are at right now. Given the rules and the makeup of Congress, you can't get anything through the Senate without 60 votes. And right now, so Democrats, it's a 50-50 split. They would need 10 Republicans to get any standalone measure through the United States Senate. So I can tell you the Democratic majority in the House is really thinking, how can they craft anything that's going to get 10 Republicans to jump on board? They're looking at, I mean, aside from the economic measures that we'll talk about through various reconciliation packages, we'll talk about that in a minute. But what else that won't fit through that package gets 60 votes? And I'm not sure what that is. They're looking at good government laws, trying to avoid what they saw as a catastrophe the last 4 years, to make sure that we can get rid of corruption, get rid of cronyism, all that, and just get the law, change the laws to make it more difficult to have that happen again. Voter protection laws, that's a top priority. And then you got everything from, all kinds of stuff that they want to get through. Can they get 10 votes in the Senate? Likely not, which is why we're looking at reconciliation packages. They've got, because of the rules, they got 3 packages that they'll be able to get through in the next 2 years. They can do 2 this year. And when I say reconciliation package, that means that they are able to pass something through the Senate with only 50 votes, 51 votes, a simple majority, if it has a direct impact on the federal budget. So they got to be very careful with how they craft these rules and the policies to make sure they fit within those confines. And they got 3 bites at the apple. We'll see the first 2 this year, 1 next year. And that really limits what Biden can do to his agenda. It really limits things that are just impacting the budget. So they're going to get creative. We know the first vote in the House on the reconciliation package is going to happen this Friday. It's on the COVID relief bill. It's a $2 trillion bill. It's got everything in there from, expanded unemployment benefits, direct checks to Americans. It's got COBRA subsidies for folks that have lost their health insurance through this crisis. It's a big bill, and they're going to have the votes, but just barely. It looks the biggest issue right now that could kill it in the Senate potentially would be whether or not they include a minimum wage increase to $15 an hour. And it really
Joel, let's stop there. We're going to get back to the relief package. Yep, okay. So Joel Wood, who do you think are the targets for the Democrats to work with to get those 10 votes?
So first of all, let me echo what Joel Kay said. Thank you. And just a frame of reference. So our organization represents all the leading commercial insurance brokerages in the country. Only 200 member firms, but that's more than 90% of commercial property casualty premiums, and that's 2/3 of all employee benefits that our member firms connect in some way. And the frame of reference specifically is that Heather is not just another executive and one of our best friends, but has chaired for a number of years our legal counsel working group, which is probably the most vibrant working group within our association, is really respected among her peers throughout the country and even some international members. But I wish that I was with you in Camden, grateful for the opportunity. And I'm trying to figure out, based on your introduction, how I could switch to a Boston accent to sort of try to confuse people as to which was the R and which was the D. As Joel noted, just before this started, Heather, you mentioned, and it's now ringing in my head, the Schoolhouse Rock song, "I'm Just a Bill," on how a bill becomes law. I think that Joel Kay and I could spend at least an hour debunking everything about how traditionally what you would learn in Poli-Sci 101 about how a bill becomes law in an environment like the one that we're in right now. So as Joel notes, there is virtually no margin of error. Currently, now she's going to win. There are going to be 2 seats that Democrats are going to pick up because of people that have joined the Biden administration. But right now, Nancy Pelosi has a margin of error. She can only lose 6 votes in the House of Representatives. And then in the Senate, obviously, with the Georgia results, Chuck Schumer has a margin of 0. And that's why Joel's line about Joe Manchin being the president or the majority leader is so apropos. And we're seeing that play out in real time this week with his opposition to Neera Tanden as the OMB director, his opposition to a $15 minimum wage in this bill, his potential opposition to Javier Becerra being named HHS secretary next week. There's very, very slim margins. And even though, for years, Heather, you've been hearing us talking about, my gosh, Washington seems so broken. It seems so partisan. It seems so bitter. How can it get better? And all of that seems almost quaint in the aftermath of January the 6th. And so, I've never seen anything like this. All I know is that with the margins the way that they are, ultimately you can't do everything using this reconciliation process that Joel described, which only requires 51 votes in the Senate as opposed to the 60 votes to avoid a filibuster, which for most policy things. So you're going to be looking at moderates on both sides. On the Republican side, the obvious ones. The six that voted to impeach. But you've got Mitt Romney, Ben Sass, Lisa Murkowski, and Susan Collins are probably the main targets there. But then vote by vote, Bill Cassidy has always been a rock-ribbed conservative Republican who voted to impeach the president and has been open-minded on some of the other things. On the flip side of that, you've got the moderate Democrats, obviously Manchin, but similarly on a number of issues and a number that matter to the insurance community and to clients. You've got Senator John Tester from Montana. You've got Senator Kirsten Sinema from Arizona. It's early yet, but John Hickenlooper, who defeated Cory Gardner in Colorado, has a reputation as an extremely moderate guy. When he was the governor of Colorado, he strongly opposed a measure to create a public option in Colorado for sort of a Medicare for all kind of a Colorado solution. And when he opposed it, it went down to defeat 80-20. So he's another one to keep an eye on, and several other moderates. I feel like, especially when I tick off that list, these are all Joel K's really close friends, and we've got good relationships there. But something's going to have to give. We're having this conversation at a great moment, though, because of the COVID package. And so any specific questions that you've got about that, it's going to move through the House on Friday. Democrats are quite united right now. And even though it's easy to speculate about the squad, for example, people on my side of the aisle call them the herbal Tea Party, as opposed to the Tea Party right-wingers on the Republican side. And that's, I think, but that's not the case right now. All the Ds are going to stick together. I don't, whether or not there may be a handful of Republican votes, I don't think that they're going to go over there on the $1.9 trillion package. And then it'll all be about what can Joe Manchin handle next week. But I think that they're going to stick together. You can see the contours of the deal. I think that this is going to go through.
So for reconciliation, it has to go through the House and then the Senate, but it only needs 51 votes, which the vice president could be the tiebreaker if the Democrats hold on to all D, right? But in my understanding of the reconciliation, and Joel, you sort of touched on this, Joel K., is that the Senate parliamentarian has to decide whether it's appropriate procedure, whether it fits. And what is that definition again? Joel,
has to have a direct impact on federal deficit or on the federal budget. So it really ties to what the House or what the Senate Budget Committee reports out, and does it fit into those budget confines and have a direct impact on the federal fisc?
So I think one of the things that's been covered a lot, and I think Senator Sanders is lobbying hard on it, is the minimum wage. Is that this may be the opportunity for the Democrats to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Have you heard anything on whether is the minimum wage included? And then is that something that you think, has there been any discussion about whether it fits within the reconciliation definition?
Yeah, this is all going to come down to, her name's Elizabeth McDonough. She's a Senate parliamentarian. She's going to figure out what can fit within those rules. And she has not made a determination yet, but I can tell you that Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema have said they oppose adding a $15 minimum wage to the package. They haven't said that they would oppose the package if it's in there, which is an important clarification, but they oppose adding it. So right now we are seeing efforts by Senator Manchin to lower that number from $15 to $11 an hour. And that might make it more palatable for the two of them to include that. And then, and then the House side, it's all about keeping the progressives on board, because if 6 of them jump, it's not going to pass. So
it's so funny how someone can become famous just by being at the right place at the right time, right? Like you had the OMB director, I don't remember the person's name, during the transition, that no one even know that position exists, and that person became the person who signs the thing to say transition begins. And now the Senate parliamentarian, and I would say 90% of the public didn't even know the position exists, and now everybody's going to focus on what this woman does or does not do.
I know it may seem a little bit obscure, but you're right to focus on she is the most important person in the Senate right now. As Joel noted, everything has to do with the federal fisc. The Affordable Care Act was passed under reconciliation after Ted Kennedy died. Suddenly, there was not a 60-vote majority. There was only a 59-vote majority. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 was passed on using the reconciliation process. It's pretty easy to do taxes using this process because anything that just raises revenue or diminishes revenue or is direct spending can fit into reconciliation. But it gets very, very dicey. And this is where Elizabeth McDonough is in a really tough spot. As Bernie Sanders argues, she previously ruled that ANWR drilling could fit into a provision in the tax cuts bill on drilling in Alaska could fit under the reconciliation rules. And so he's saying if that can fit, why can't a minimum wage fit? But it is irrelevant as long as Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema are saying, I am not going to support $15 minimum wage. But again, that important distinction, they haven't said that they would oppose the entire measure as a result of that. So right now, the minimum wage is the top issue in this. And I don't know for your client base, most of the professionals, certainly in the retail and hospitality space, this is a very big deal.
It's a big issue. It's a big issue for some of them, yes.
And especially with the tip credits, as well in the restaurant employees.
Yeah. So let's go to the COVID relief bill that we've been talking about that looks like it's going to go through the reconciliation. What kind of relief is currently in there for businesses?
Go ahead, Joel.
Well, you got an extension of the PPP program, it has been wildly popular. It had a lot of hiccups, obviously, on the rollout and a lot of haves and has-nots. But from what I understand, that's largely been clarified for the most part. So there's an extension of that. And we're still working on some liability protections. I know that's a big issue for the business community. And by and large, the political center in both sides of the aisle and both chambers support liability protections. But what are the parameters of those protections?
So for that,
that's where the differences lie.
So just for clarification for the participants, is liability protections would be if somebody sues you for contracting COVID-19 at your business establishment, and this would provide some immunity for that. And we saw some states trying to pass it through. I think a couple states were successful, but the majority have not been successful in getting it through the legislature. And so you're saying that this is still part of the COVID relief package.
It is not in the package, okay. But it continues to be part of the conversation on when and how can we find middle ground to include this in something. And the issue is federal standards, OSHA standards, should they exist? How long out should we have the protections for? Should it be to 2024? Should it be just to the end of the year? What about tying it to vaccinations? What about mandates for vaccinations and all of that? I know there's a lot of questions around that. And of course, there's a lot of money in this package for vaccination rollouts and increasing all of that. I mean, the Biden administration, their top priority right now is kill the virus. Number one, kill the virus. And they think that if they are successful in holding to their essentially promise that Biden made last week, saying we will have enough vaccines for every American to get vaccinated if he wants it if the American wants it by the middle of the summer, and we should be back to normal by December. Those are his red lines, and they are determined to stick to that. And they think that if they can stick to that, they can get a lot of their other measures done, which is a big infrastructure package, a big climate change stuff, tax reform, healthcare, all of that. But it is all essential on killing this virus. So that's what this package is really focused on.
So is there? So let's ring them off, right? So there's been a lot of push and debate around whether local governments would be afforded relief under this package. Is it included or not included?
State and local relief is in there.
Okay.
Could I just say this? I would say that it's 20 minutes past the hour, and we have been so civil to one another.
Right.
I'm gonna sort of go there. There's not going to be any liability relief.
Yeah.
When the one thing, yes, we can talk a lot about how that margin of error is zero for Chuck Schumer. But the one thing, when you are the Senate Majority Leader, your power is absolute when it comes to scheduling anything on the Senate floor. And Mitch McConnell had a red line on liability relief. And one thing that Democrats are pretty, you can hear a lot of talk about, if we had the right kind of OSHA standards or or if everybody follows the local regs and the state regs and the OSHA regs, all of which, by the way, are going to be incompatible with one another, then we could have some limited liability relief so that things don't get out of hand. That's crazy. Democrats are never going to be, they are lockstep with the trial bar on this. Whatever you think of the trial bar, there is not going to be any liability relief in this. So the big issues are, we've already covered minimum wage, as you noted, hundreds of billions of dollars. And this tends to be a red state, blue state issue, honestly, on the state and local relief. And that's a big reason why you're not going to see any of those moderate Republicans going over to vote for this because of that divide. And then the health related thing, there are some changes to the ACA in this. I know we're not going to talk in depth on health policy, but there are some significant changes in the criteria for participating in the exchanges, wherein now everything is based on what percentage of the federal poverty line are you at. It will move that to be much more generous to a 8.5% of out-of-pocket expenses in the exchanges. I don't think that there's some things that trouble us a little bit because we care a lot about the employer-sponsored group health insurance marketplace and don't want anything to diminish it. But I don't think that we see anything there that is an existential threat to employer-sponsored coverage there. So you've got the $1,400 stimulus, individual stimulus, at a certain income level. You've got changes in the ACA. You've got the state and local relief. You don't have liability reform, and very importantly, there is a COBRA subsidy of 85% that would go through the third quarter of this year. It's kind of interesting. We support that, especially if you support employer-sponsored coverage. A good way to maintain it is to help employees and employers be able to keep them at least insured. That's a great thing. We're very happy about that. That's something that, for the most part, Democrats support, and for the most part, Republicans haven't been as supportive. However, I hear mixed things about that, particularly in that retail hospitality sector. A lot of folks are like, my goodness, we've got to go back. Sometimes it's hard to go back more than a year and find these employees and then make sure that they are covered. And so the administrative complexity on this is significant. We are for it, but it's something that everybody needs to be mindful of, because I would say, Democrats are not going to allow Biden to fail on a COVID relief bill. And as much as, yes, you've got some chest thumping right now, and if I was a progressive and I cared about the minimum wage, I would be threatening in the House that when the Senate sends it back over without the minimum wage or with a diminished minimum wage, that I would threaten my vote to vote against it, but they're not going to do that. So it is going to get through. And I think Joel Kay would agree with me on that.
Yeah, I do agree with you. I take issue with the way you the liability issue and the context you put that in, only because I've heard directly from Chuck Schumer, and I'm going to talk to him tonight, actually, and I'll raise it with him, and he'll tell me the same thing. He supports liability protection. It's not through the end of 2024, and not so strong that it completely wipes out your ability for medical malpractice lawsuits. So he's all for some kind of standards, and I can say what I've heard from a lot of our members and their clients. They just want clarity. They want standards. They want something they can point to, and they'd rather have clarity than nothing right now. So that's where they're at. The biggest issue, I think, right now that's facing Republicans is not just, the future of the party.
This is how we win debates. We don't let the other person talk. Go ahead, Joel.
The biggest issue right now, I think, for Republicans is, Democrats are planning, and maybe this is, we are 1 month into this administration, and they totally get that. But Biden's approval rating is in the 60s. This bill they're debating right now, $2 trillion bill. This is a huge bill. It's polling at 70% support among the American public. So they are riding this wave high. And this, of course, is consistent with kill the virus and, totally capitalize on the political gain that's going to come from all of that. But I think it's going to be challenging for Republicans in purple districts, and there's a lot of them right now, to could just say no all the time.
So what kind of relief, you said it's going to expand the PPP. So is it just basically putting more funding in the program that existed prior, or is there additional relief for restaurants? Do you have to be in a certain industry? what is the relief going to look like and in what form?
The PPP, Joel's referring to the December bill, which that still has not been rolled out. There is not. Here's the thing here's where it gets a little bit confusing, because many of you may have seen 2 weeks ago when the Senate did a quote unquote votorama, where they and Kamala Harris cast the 51st vote at 5 a.m. To get the budget resolution moving forward, to start the process of of the reconciliation COVID package. And there were 40 some odd votes that were cast, one of which would have created a $110 billion restaurant relief act that was specific to restaurants, and they expanded it so that franchise units could take advantage of it up to a certain level. That is not going to be in the final bill. And that vote was 90-10 because nobody wanted to be against restaurants getting relief. There's other measures that, there's a specific standalone bill for gyms as well. This is not going to be industry specific. And I think that we're still looking at that pot of a couple of $100 billion. I play around a little bit on the side in the restaurant industry, own a piece of a barbecue restaurant that's actually surviving pretty well in COVID. In Annapolis, Maryland. And so I'm watching this closely because we're eligible for another PPP bite at the apple, but it's yet to come through. And I think that's consistent with most. So not individual business relief in this. It's going to be more oriented towards the stimulus payments for individuals, child tax credits, and state and local relief, as well as a ton of money for vaccines, COBRA, et cetera, but not a PPP expansion.
Okay. And one of the things that, early on when the pandemic hit, a lot of companies were looking to their property carrier thinking that they could get some relief for business interruption. I mean, then the government came along and one of the things that we talked about a lot is, where is that relief, and is there relief going to be forward? So when the terroristic attack happened on 9/11, TRIA was created, which was a reinsurance for terroristic acts because the insurance companies couldn't afford to provide the insurance. Is there any sort of discussion around that type of relief for any future pandemics?
Go ahead, Joel. But by the way, you tried to get away with this earlier. I'm just going to say, as Abraham Lincoln did, calling a tail a leg does not mean that a dog has 5 legs. Now go ahead.
All right, Priya. So yeah, the Pandemic Risk Insurance Act, that's something, everything that you described, Heather, is exactly what we are working on with the policyholder community and with large commercial insurance carriers. And that's to create a public-private partnership that would allow policyholders to buy a commercial coverage to cover a pandemic, which didn't frankly exist in the markets before. It's complicated. Like, a lot of the insurance companies are saying that they can't afford. You can't predict this. This is not like terrorism. This is not like any other risk that you can accurately underwrite. So they cannot afford to cover this. So they need heavy federal involvement. The carriers would prefer a program that looks like the National Flood Insurance Program, where the federal government carries all the risk and they just administer the policies. So that proposal is out there. Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney from New York, who's a close friend of ours and the largest commercial insurance brokerage firm, is one of her constituents. She's pushing for her own bill, which is just like the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act. And she literally just crossed out the word terrorism and wrote in pandemic and dropped it. And her intention was to stir the pot. Let's drop this. Let's get everyone riled up and see what the industry can live with. And so that's what we're going through right now. There's a working group that we are participating, and we are totally in bed with the policyholders on this. We just want a solution. It's not our position to figure out what kind of risk and how much risk can carriers or insurance companies carry. But you guys figure out where the lines are and where the federal government should step in. And right now, policyholders just need to have the option to buy a policy. So we're working with the policyholders on this right now. Right as of now, it's a totally partisan process. There is a lot of Democrats that support the bill. There's no Republicans that support the bill yet, but that's because there's a lot of versions out there, and the coalition of stakeholders hasn't united around one proposal yet. But we are, it's moving forward. I can't say I'm optimistic or pessimistic either way. I think a lot has to change for this really to get enough momentum to cross the finish line. But I think this also, depends on the vaccination process, and where do we stand 6 to 7 months? I'm not sure that the momentum is going to be as high once we're out of this as it is now. And I know the Congresswoman who's championing this is really pushing to get this done in Biden's first 100 days. So we're heavily involved in that.
So, and just to be clear, that would be prospective. It would not cover COVID. It would be any future pandemic. So this would not provide elite relief for people in need. We do have our first question. It says, our firm is waiting on our PPP loan forgiveness, and we are being told that the process is on hold with the new administration getting set in place. Any time frame on when that process gets moving ahead? Sorry.
Go ahead, Joel.
I have not heard. I don't know that I have a good answer for that.
I apologize. I'm the last person on earth left with a landline that just went off, of course.
That's okay. I have a landline.
So yes, I would not blame this on the new administration. The SBA processes on this have been moving slowly. I would invite Mr. Gaffney to drop, or let me inquire with our legal counsel and get back to you.
Okay, perfect.
I have not heard of any specific delays. I know that it really has been an IRS internal issue more than anything else. And so hopefully that will be sorted out. I know that my own personal, investment in a restaurant, we've not had any delays on this, but it's not the first time that I've heard it. And I think that process will be getting underway. There was a lot of jerking around in the development of the PPP and with the Treasury Department saying, what are the qualifications for forgiveness if you are a profitable company? And so, we had, even among our own member firms, you had a lot that were planning on taking money. There were some that took the money and then gave the money back. And I think a lot of that is understandable, just given the circumstances of how that emerged in that first COVID relief package way back in, what was that, June? But let me see if I can divine a little bit more on on where that process is going to stand. Back to the business interruption issue, because I know it's critical, and certainly it was a crisis for many. I think most people honestly did not know that there was an exception for pandemics in the overwhelming majority of commercial insurance policies. Now, that is not 100% the case. There have been well over 1,000 lawsuits that have been filed. To date, I'd say we're probably at maybe the top of the second or third inning on this. There's still a lot left on this, but the trend line on this, certainly with respect to all of the actions that have been filed in federal court, most of them have just been dismissed. And there have been a handful of cases where they have not been dismissed and they will proceed on, but no final resolution on any case in favor of a policyholder. That's consistent with the fact that 95% of insurance policies did have policy language that explicitly excluded pandemics. Then the question that the trial lawyers are raising in these cases is, does the coronavirus adhere to surfaces there, and therefore does it constitute property damage? And so the intersection of pandemic exception, property damage, and the civil orders for businesses to close, the shutdown orders, where does all that play out? But to date, we're seeing most of those decisions have not gone the way of the policyholders. However, that's still playing out. And you are correct to note that, yes, we are heavily engaged and we support sort of all of the above. Some within the insurance industry have proposed a solution for prospectively on pandemics that's modeled after the terrorism risk insurance program. Some support a proposal modeled after the flood insurance program, with the sort of write your own companies that voluntarily decide whether or not they want to be in this line of business with a federal backstop. And even the Zurich Insurance Company has proposed something more akin to the federal crop insurance program. And so, as Joel said, Republicans not quite on board with this yet, but it's not a philosophical disagreement. And I think that, a way forward can be found on this. I just think that with respect to business interruption, a lot of people, all of us have been asking, my gosh, did anybody see this coming, that we could have a global pandemic like this? Well, commercial insurance companies saw it coming. And that's why when you had the SARS outbreak in 2006, 2007, that's when almost all of the insurance companies adopted this explicit pandemic viral exclusion in the policies. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to move forward. We are the most progressive insurance organization. Hopefully this won't turn into a circular firing squad, but we're working very closely with the major policyholder groups to try to get some sort of it's going to have to be not a lot of balance. Insurance companies are not going to accept balance sheet risk for pandemics. And so it's going to have to be a very significant federal backstop. It's just that our view is, and there are certainly voices within our industry that say, no mas, we want nothing to do with this. And because it affects all clients at all times, we don't want to, have the claims responsibility on this. We don't want any balance sheet risk on this. Keep us out of it. This is a federal disaster program. And I get that. I understand it. But we believe that the mechanism of the existing commercial insurance marketplace should be utilized on any solution moving forward.
Yeah, and I could just do a little housekeeping there. We have our next webinar in March, which I don't have the exact date on me, but it will be an invite. We're going to do a year in review of COVID claims. So we'll be giving an hour-long update. My colleagues Brad and Laura will be doing an hour-long update on where the litigation stands and what's next. So more to come on that. So going to, the one thing I will say, probably the only time I was jealous of Donald Trump in the last 4 years was when he drove that big truck on the White House lawn. I've always wanted to drive one of those, and pull the horn and just have all that power. So, infrastructure is something that, everybody believes in. Everybody thinks it's a good idea. We had infrastructure week, I think multiple times during the last administration, but then nothing happens. So my first question is, what does it mean to have an infrastructure bill?
That's a good question. So this is going to be in their second reconciliation package. Their Democratic strategy is to have an infrastructure package that includes a lot of provisions for green energy, and they can double team it as a climate change bill. And it will likely have some tax reform measures in there as well. When it comes to infrastructure, they want to go big. They want to go real big. And there's going to be a lot of noise about how do you pay for this. They're not planning on paying for this. They're planning on this paying for itself, because they believe that the taxable income that's going to result from a strong, big infrastructure package will pay for itself. So they're looking, rumors now are that it'll be a $2 trillion package. And it's going to focus on everything from roads, highways, high-speed rail. And this is what I've heard. There's no language that exists yet on this, but they will be pulling bills just off the shelf that's been proposed in various Congresses. But really to beef up the infrastructure. They're scared mostly not about being criticized for adding to the deficit, which they know is out there. They don't think voters actually vote on that. So they're not concerned about the political ramifications of that. They're concerned about the political ramifications that they're going to experience from the coal industry, from gas, natural gas, oil, because this is going to heavily lean towards green energy, climate change goals. So, but they are viewing this as a big jobs bill. And they will point to the fact that, Donald Trump really supported a large infrastructure package. Barack Obama supported a large infrastructure package. And they could never figure out what the parameters were and agree on a total price tag, which is why it never got done. But there's broad bipartisan support to get it done. And they are going to lean heavily to use the reconciliation measure again to do a $2 trillion package.
So the one thing I would say is when you talk about the green energy, the one thing I know, I know a lot about Joe Manchin, but the one thing I know is his state is coal miners. So, I think if anybody remembers, Joe Manchin is probably beloved by his state because of, if everybody remembers, that coal mining accident probably 15 years ago, and where he literally did not leave the site of those coal miners trapped in that mine for days. And so, he's beloved in that state. He was governor at the time. And so to me, how do you get him on board if it is a green package?
So that's an interesting question. I was in the room with him last year talking about this, and there was a lot of controversy when he was appointed to be chair of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee for that very reason, particularly after the election of AOC and Green New Deal being out there and the party wanting to go big on climate change measures. Here they appointed a coal state senator to chair the committee. The Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warrens were really not rubbed the right way on that. But listening to him talk about this, he will tell you he's 100% on board with climate change. He knows this is man-made. He knows this is real. He knows we have to address it. He takes issue with his party about how they talk about it. He's like, I'm not preaching to the choir. All these guys, the AOCs, the left, they are preaching to the choir and they're just talking to their own people in their own bubble. He's like, I know how to talk to coal miners. He knows that the jobs for their children is not in this industry. It's out of this industry. This is an economic issue. It's a jobs issue. It's not just a coal issue. So he will say that Democrats need to figure out how to message on this appropriately so that it does resonate with people that have jobs that are in the opposite industry, but not view this as a job killing measure, but a job making measure.
So I see this as one of those issues where, yes, there is broad bipartisan support, but it's a situation where everybody wants to go to heaven and nobody wants to die.
Yeah, that's right.
Even if we had Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Kevin McCarthy, Mitch McConnell, the president and the vice president on this Zoom call right now, we wouldn't know with any degree of certainty how this is going to play out, because it's clear they are going to use their second bite at the reconciliation apple. They will only get up to 3 bites at it this year for technical reasons we won't go into. For infrastructure, and their pay for on this is going to be major reforms to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. This again is where Manchin and the moderates come very deeply into play. And if they go too big on the tax, on overhauling and removing all the tax cuts from the 2017 Act, they threaten losing any moderate Republican support, even among a lot of Republicans that would like to vote for a big infrastructure bill. If it's going to be an entirely partisan effort, as this COVID package is going to be, you bet it's going to be all green. It's going to be mass transit. It will tilt to blue state projects. And then the question is, well, how far are they going to go? The number one question that I get from my member executives is what's going to happen on taxes. And it's not they never ask the question about that 400,000 and up, and how the individual tax question. They're all concerned about where's the rate going to go and what's going to happen to capital gains. And again, you really have to look to the moderates. It's clear how, we know how far Bernie Sanders and other progressives in the Senate would be willing to go on the tax front. They would want to completely eliminate the entirety of the 2017 Act. Where are those moderates going to wind up? My gut tells me that the numbers will wind up in a neighborhood that is digestible, that it'll be like a 25% corporate tax rate. Cap gains a little less clear as to how far they're going to want to go on this. And yes, Joel's right. Especially during the Trump administration, Trump never cared about deficits. I mean that's pretty consistent through his entire life in terms of debt and deficits. And you're going to hear Republicans. They're primarily arguing. Joel says it will be a failing argument with respect to the COVID relief package. He may be right on that, but I think it's going to get a lot more difficult when Democrats have to start, especially these purple state and purple district Democrats, when they start having to walk the plank on a big tax revenue bill. And I never thought as a Republican that I was going to be citing Larry Summers, but his op-ed piece, I believe in the Washington Post 2 or 3 weeks ago, warning about the inflationary pressures that if, we can't just rip the Band-Aid off on all kinds of spending items when it comes to Green New Deal, infrastructure, COVID relief. He said, whoa, slow down. Now, I think Yellen had a pretty good response to that, and I think Democrats still do want to go very, very big. I think 2 trillion may be a little bit too high, but I think you will see it emerging in some form. As soon as we get past this COVID relief bill, you'll start seeing the machinations towards a new budget resolution within the next 2 months or so.
I will say I've heard comments from Ways and Means Committee members saying that they would like to go as high as between 3 to 5 trillion when talking about this. And when they say infrastructure, we're not think beyond roads and bridges, think power grid, think what's happening in Texas right now. It's water, it is everything, and they want to go huge. So to Joel's point, I mean, this is going to be a complicated process.
Yeah, it's like the late great Senator Everett Dirksen of Illinois once said, a billion here, a billion there, sooner or later you're talking real money. And now it's a trillion here, a trillion there.
Yeah. Now, just going back on the taxes for a second, and the Jobs Act without the repeal, do those they sunset at some point, correct?
A lot of them do, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a 10-year window on most of them. However, this will impact some of your clients, and even within our own membership. 2/3 of our 200 members are organized as pass-through entities. And there was a special relief extending that 20% tax rate for organizations that are organized as pass-throughs. That is not uniform. We were in the financial services industry, only insurance brokerages and real estate brokerages are eligible for that particular tax break. It was aimed primarily at manufacturers, but that provision expires in 2023. And I can tell you one thing that a lot of stuff I'm not certain how it's going to play out in Washington. I guarantee you that's not going to be extended with a Democratic House, a Democratic Senate, and a Democratic president. Now, could we see something morph at a later date that might be some sort of a compromise on that? Potentially. But I would say if you're getting that tax break, you need to be planning carefully, assuming 2023 rolls around without that tax break being in effect.
Okay. Well, we're almost at the hour, but I'm going to ask one fun question. And I hate when people start talking about the next election. But Joel Wood, I'm going to put you on the spot. Who is the presidential candidate for the president in 3.5 years?
You're breaking up, Heather. So here's look. You have to be something. We pride ourselves as an organization on being, not nonpartisan. Where you have to be something in Washington as a lobbyist. There are tens of thousands of us who are lobbyists. And
Joel, I think when I went to my first legislative meeting with you 12 years ago, you told me the ass you kick today is the ass you kiss tomorrow. What you're saying?
The foot you step on today is connected to the ass you have to kiss tomorrow.
That's right.
That's right.
But I am a Republican, but I'm a never Trump Republican, and I hope I'm not offending anyone. I just fear that I'm going to spend the rest of my life, clawing my way out of the rubble left on this. I saw a really fascinating number earlier this week, and you take the 3 statewide elected office holders in Florida: Marco Rubio, Rick Scott, former governor, now senator, and Ron DeSantis, the current governor. Their popularity rating among registered Republicans in Florida, and Trump won Florida handily this past time. It was an astonishing number in terms of who they liked the best. 11% of them said Rick Scott. 17% of them said Marco Rubio. 58% of them said Ron DeSantis, because of the perception that DeSantis is a Trump guy. And so, the grip, and we're going to see this weekend when on Sunday, Donald Trump addresses the CPAC conference in Florida, and will essentially announce himself to be the presumptive nominee in 2024. Well, a lot's going to change. Look, I'm more interested right now in 2022. And frankly, Republicans have a tough map when it comes to the Senate in 2022. They've got a lot more senators. You've got, obviously Pat Toomey right there in Pennsylvania, who's not running for re-election. Rob Portman in Ohio, he would have been a shoo-in for re-election, and he's not running, and that becomes more in play. So the map is not good for Republicans. On the other hand, history tells us that whenever both chambers of Congress and the presidency are occupied under one party, that it's a very good year for the party that is out of power. And I think, you look at all those votes that are going to be really tough for a lot of those purple districts, and there's probably only 6 or 7 Democrats left in the House or conference, House caucus that are in districts that Trump outright won. But that, when Pelosi can't afford to give all the blue dogs, for example, a pass to vote against this measure, or give all of the squad and the progressives, which grew in number this past election, a pass. So should I be honest and answer the question? I can tell you, 3 or 4 that I would want to be the nominee. I think, but right now, anybody, it's painful for me to say this, but I think Lindsey Graham is probably right. You can't count out the power. I regret that it's a cult of personality as opposed to a party of ideas. But they are, it is definitely a huge majority of Republicans that, and frankly, as awful as the events of January 6th were, and that process in between the election and the swearing in, the overwhelming majority of Republicans believe that the election was stolen from Donald Trump. That's what all the polls say. So it's painful for me to say it, but you can't count out his impact, and that at least is honest.
Well, we might be doing weekend at Bernie's for the election next time around. So pulling 2 people out, right?
Exactly.
So Joel K., one fun question for you. This is like you're on MSNBC, right? The tough question goes to the Republican, easy ones to the Democrats. But little jest. But Joel K., what event are you most looking forward to when everybody's vaccinated and you can get back into the political world?
I want to hike the Grand Canyon with Kirsten Sinema again. We do these really fun political pack trips with our favorite members.
She hosts name dropper.
She's great. She's one of my. I'm hosting an event for her next week, Heather. I hope that you're able to come to that. She's just incredible. She's up there with Manchin in terms of holding the power as to what gets done. But she's a normal human being. She's like 45 years old. She's super fit and active. 2 years ago, I guess, I had the honor of hiking the Grand Canyon with her. Which is a crazy experience. You go rim to rim, top to bottom, and like you Google this, and everyone says, "Do not do it in one day." And she does it in one day and forces you to do it, and it's a grueling experience. But I've never had that sense of accomplishment afterwards. And I told her beforehand, I was like, Kirsten, I'm going to go back with the other lobbyists, and I'm just not going to do it. I can't, I've changed my mind. I'm going to go drink with these guys. I'll see you afterwards. She's like, "No, you're not." No, you're not. She's like, there are people doing this hike that I'm worried about. She's like, you're not one of them. You're going to do it. So she made me do it. And afterwards, I was so thankful she made me. I was like, can I just get a hug? Because that was incredible. I'm really looking forward to that. But, honestly, just getting back and seeing people, we're really fortunate that we are, I've been at the council for 13 years. Joel's been here for 20 plus years. We're really well plugged in with staff and members of Congress. So functioning on Zooms is not difficult for us because we've already built these relationships. But man, you can't have those side conversations. You can't gossip. You can't interrupt people. There's nothing organic about a Zoom call. So I'm just really looking forward to seeing these guys in person and catching up on everything.
I got a quick response, Heather. I just want to be drinking in a bar with you.
Me too. Me too. I too want to get back to my normal life, and I want to see everybody in person, including our clients, a couple I've seen throughout the pandemic, but I'm really dying to get back out and about. And so hopefully we can get the vaccines rolling again. And, and I hope everybody is safe and stay safe for the next few months, but hopefully in a few months, we'll be doing these live and not over Zoom. So with that, thank you, Joel, for joining us, and appreciate for fighting for our clients and us in DC. And thank you for all our clients. And we'll get back to the one question we had sometime this week. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.